Hey, what's up, YouTube? Welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, I just want to say hello. My name is Greg. I'm glad that you've stopped by on my channel to check out this video. In my previous video, I talked about and covered the topic of spiritual abuse and how to identify it, in addition to some tips on how to escape that abusive system. But today, I want to offer a video in contrast to the previous one, and it is on the topic of what actually makes for good leadership and makes for a good and biblical pastor. Stay tuned. To be sure, there are good and bad examples of what it means to be a pastor. But today we're answering the question of what it means to be a good and biblical pastor. To begin with, the Bible tells us in 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 24 that the man who aspires the office of a bishop, or in other words, a pastor or elder, he must be able to teach. First of all, this isn't a preference, it isn't a recommendation, this isn't something that is just merely convenient for the church. It is a condition that must be met in order for the individual who aspires this particular position. It's necessary for him to even qualify. Now, with teaching, the ability to teach, this assumes that you have a number of other abilities, which includes a basic understanding of grammar and basic and adequate analytical skills to analyze the text, to analyze the scriptures, and basic and adequate interpretive skills so you can interpret the scriptures and what the authors intended to communicate to their readers. Not what we want the text to say, but what the text itself is saying. And also, this means basic and adequate communicative skills. If you cannot communicate the scriptures, then this means you can't teach. They go hand in hand. And this also means that this is important, because if you're unable to teach, then this means that you're unable to make disciples, because the commission in Matthew chapter 28 encompassed the not only baptizing, but to make disciples, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you. So the commission, the Great Commission, cannot be fulfilled by a pastor who isn't able to teach, and hence the absolute necessity for the teachers and pastors to be able to do just that, and that is teach. The second qualification for a pastor that must be met is found in 1 Timothy chapter 3 verse 6. And the Bible tells us that the pastor, or the pastor in preparation, must not be a recent convert. Now, to be sure, this is a bit subjective, because recent can be interpreted many ways, because it's a relative term. To a person who has been in ministry for 40 years might define recent a different way than someone who has been in the ministry for a year. Although the scriptures do not give a definitive date, I think that a general rule of thumb is 3 years. And the reason why I say that is because Jesus Christ himself discipled the apostles for 3 years. Now, this isn't to be a legalistic date or a legalistic duration that you can just impose on any and everybody who is preparing to enter into the pastoral ministry. However, I think it's safe. But to be sure, there are definitely exceptions, and ultimately it's going to boil down to the Spirit of God and those in the particular local church, namely the leaders and the mature and seasoned elders who are preparing this individual, because this particular individual may excel exceptionally well over against someone who takes a much longer time to actually learn. But Paul does tell us that this is intended to keep the pastor away from pride. So it's not only an efficiency issue, an adequacy issue, and skill issue, but it's a pride issue. And I think that we should be very, very cautious of immediately sending people out to the pastoral office. This is exactly why Paul prohibits Timothy to lay hands speedily on people. Now, some have taken this to mean cast out demons by laying their hands on the person who is possessed. That's not what it's meaning. That's not a contextual rendering, an accurate rendering of that particular text. Paul is offering prescriptions of what he wants to see in the church of God, and what the people in Acts did when they commissioned those out to ministry who were prepared. They would lay their hands on them and commission them out. So we should not be very hasty and quick to lay our hands upon those that are preparing for ministry to just commission them out. Because if we do, we can ruin that pastor and his family, and we can ruin the congregation that way. So it must be avoided. The Bible tells us in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 4 through 5, that the third qualification is that the man of God who aspires the office of a pastor must manage well his household. Because if he cannot care for his own household, how can he care for the church of God? Now, this encompasses many factors, like financial factors, mental factors, spiritual factors, economic factors, sociological factors, relational factors, moral factors, competency factors, and leading factors, and the list can go on. This isn't intended to be an exhaustive teaching on this particular aspect of pastoral qualification. But generally put, he must be a well-rounded individual, a competent leader that leads his wife and leads his kids. And his kids cannot be accused of being chaotic and unruly and disobedient. That isn't to say that his kids are to be perfect, but generally speaking, the fault of the chaos in his home cannot be because of him, cannot be due to his inadequacy or his incompetency or unwillingness to lead his family. It should be kept in order, and he should lay down the rules and be a great exemplar of what it means to be a godly and able body minister who can lead the church of God. I remember Jordan Peterson said, before you go out and try to change the world, make your bed. So that was a word to a lot of the social activists who want to go out and change the world. And what he implied there is, look, if you can't get down the A, B's, and C's, don't think you can go and jump immediately to the X, Y's, and Z's. You have to get home base first. And once you accomplish that, then you can consider taking care of the household of God. So the fourth qualification that is required of the pastor before he goes into the pastoral ministry is that he must be a righteous man. And in 1 Timothy, it tells us that he must be sober-minded. He shouldn't be selfishly ambitious and pursuing selfish gain. He must be given to hospitality, the husband of one wife, and so forth and so forth. And this is obvious to most, and it's very simple, but it's not obvious to some, because there are some who suspect that you can be a pastor and be ungodly and unrighteous. And while he isn't to be perfect, we should never expect perfection of a person, because if that was the case, then there would be nobody in ministry. But he should nevertheless be an exemplar of what it means to be a righteous man. And so if we fail there, we're going to fail in the entire church, because the scriptures tell us priests like people. If you have several men of God who are following in the ways of unrighteousness, you can rest assured that the entire, if not almost all of the entire congregation will be unrighteous themselves. The fifth qualification, according to the scriptures, that must be met is that this man of God must be above reproach. Now, this kind of overlaps with the fourth qualification, but here's the thing. A man of God can actually be doing everything morally right and can be living a righteous life and still not be above reproach. And this gets into some technical and sometimes cultural taboos or things that are culturally unacceptable. And I'm not going to give an exhaustive list of what that exactly means. But basically, he should have a great reputation from the church and even the outsiders. He can't be spoken ill against. And even if he has done everything right, there are some cases where you can do everything morally correct and still not be above reproach. And so this would imply that there are times where you actually have to die to your own convictions, or you have to die to certain cultural practices in order to build that bridge and have a great reputation in the minds of those that you're seeking to serve, because our lives are no longer our own. We should not place any stumbling block in the way of the world or the church. And if we can do that, we will be following the ways of maturity and love. The next qualification is a very controversial one that doesn't sit very well with our Western culture, but it is nevertheless a biblical command. And it's that those who aspire to the office of a pastor must be a male. It's implied in the very statement that he, referring to the qualifications that we've already spoken about, must be a husband of one wife. So it's implied that this particular individual is a male. And in addition to that, there are several other passages that gives us a particular definition of what it means to be a pastor. And in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, it tells us that that the pastor must be a male. And some have said that Paul here is just trying to be culturally sensitive, and that there are some other contextual and cultural factors here at play. But no, the scripture I just cited, Paul actually appeals to the order of creation to justify his command to the church that the pastor must be a male. He says first Adam was formed, then Eve. And here's another thing to consider, and I don't intend for this to be an exhaustive defense for this position. But if you think about it, all 66 books were written by males. There wasn't a single female apostle. There wasn't a single female pastor or teacher ever recorded in the book of Acts. Furthermore, the Greek words episkopos and presbyteros, that are Greek words for elder, pastor, and so forth, and the Hebrew counterparts located in the Old Testament, the word elder there just assumed masculinity. It assumed that it was a male, and the priests and the Levites were who gave service to the Old Testament system were all males. In fact, it was clearly in the Torah that this was required for those who were to assume this particular ministry. And my argument is that it hasn't changed in the New Testament. There's overwhelming and exceptional evidence that this is in fact a biblical stance. But I do want to say a word of caution. I think that we have to be very careful to communicate this in love, and because I understand that this is very controversial, but nevertheless, this is the stance that I'm taking, and I believe very clearly that this is a biblical command. The final qualification isn't an explicitly biblical command, but I want to be very cautious here and careful to say that I have a firm conviction with biblical support, I believe, to make this case. And I believe that a pastor must be not only a teacher, but must be a shepherd. And when I say shepherd, I'm talking about in a way that mimics the shepherd, the shepherdology of Jesus Christ. Namely, that he was relational. Oftentimes we have very professional pastors who just want to, or have a strong desire to preach a sermon on Wednesday and Sunday and take care of certain programs and oversee that, but never gets out among the sheep, never makes any investment towards the people, are not actually discipling anybody, not really attending their homes to see how they're doing, or to visit them in the hospitals individually. This, I believe, is a catastrophe, and this is dangerous, because Jesus was not a professional pastor. He was a biblical and relational pastor. And I think a great deal of a relationship has to be integrated in our pastoral endeavors and ministry. If we will do that, we will follow the great shepherd and have a biblically successful ministry and church. God bless you. Hey guys, before you go, I just want to get in the final word and say that if you have been blessed by this ministry and have been greatly encouraged or informed and educated, I just want to encourage you, if you want to help support this ministry, you can make a really, really great and big difference. I'm not asking for money. If you want to just like this video, comment, and share to 3 to 5 people, 3 to 5 of your friends, and encourage them to subscribe. This will help support this ministry in very tremendous ways that you could have never imagined. So God bless you, and thank you for your support. Amen.